Hi, I'm Kimberly from Sweet Red Poppy, and today we're going to be making the cutest little baby hats. This is my top knot baby hat sewing pattern, and it's a free download on sweetredpoppy.com. For this tutorial, you'll need knit fabric that's 95% cotton, 5% lycra. You'll also need to print out your baby knit hat pattern from sweetredpoppy.com. You'll want a ruler, a rotary mat, a rotary cutter, pins, tape, a turning tool, a pair of scissors, EloFlex thread, and an iron and a pressing mat. You'll also need a sewing machine. To get started with this tutorial, you'll want to download and print off the free baby hat pattern. You can find this at sweetredpoppy.com/babyhat. Once you've printed off your pattern, you'll want to tape it together. So I'm going to walk you through. This is really easy. You'll just need a little bit of tape, and then you can line up the pink stars. I'm going to go ahead and cut out the largest size. So I'm going to use my rotary cutter. I'm just going to follow the red markings, and I'm just going to go all the way around. If you're brand new to sewing, the double top knot hat can be a little bit tricky. So you might want to start off with the single top knot. Now getting into the center of this can be a little bit tricky. So just going to turn your paper, or you can cut this out with scissors. It's totally up to you. This baby hat is one of my most popular blog posts, and I've had so many requests for this video, so I'm so excited to be sharing it with you. This little hat is perfect on babies for a number of reasons. First off, when you have a newborn, it's really important to keep their little heads nice and warm. So whenever I'm having a baby, I make up a big bundle of these baby hats, and I also love to keep them on hand because they're perfect for gifts for baby showers. So now I'm going to cut out the baby hat band. This is the part that goes around the bottom of your hat and keeps everything nice and tight. So now I have both of my pattern pieces cut out, and it's time to get my fabric ready. When you're using this pattern, you will want to use a specific type of fabric. What I'm using is a knit fabric, and this is a 95% cotton, 5% lycra blend. And what's important about the 5% lycra blend is that it keeps everything nice and tight. I think we've all worn that one pair of jeans, and you put it on, and in the morning it's nice and tight, and by the end of the day they're just sagging down to your knees. That's what we're trying to avoid. So the 5% lycra is actually what keeps everything nice and tight and makes sure that your fabric isn't going to stretch out during the day. So I'm just going to lay this out, and I'm going to fold it on itself. And this band piece is actually going to be cut on the fold. So I'm going to make sure that this lines up perfectly. I like to use as little fabric as possible, so I am always trying to get things lined up perfectly. That way I don't have any fabric waste. If you're planning on making a bunch of these hats, what I like to do is cut this pattern out of a heavier weight paper like cardstock. That way you can just cut it out over and over, and you don't have to worry about your pattern falling apart. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this band out, just cutting it on the fold. And you do want to make sure that your band is running across the greatest stretch of your fabric. Now it's time to cut out the hat portion. I'm going to turn this up, and you're going to be cutting two hats out, so one for the front and one for the back. And you can do coordinating fabrics, or you can do contrasting fabrics. It's totally up to you. I'm going to cut two out of each fabric, and then I'm going to mix them together. Okay, so we have both of our little hat pieces. So I'm going to be making two hats today, so I've cut out fabric of each of my patterns, and I'm just going to switch them so that they have contrasting pieces to go together, because I think that looks really cute. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take my band fabric and I'm going to fold it in half with right sides facing each other. Then I'm just going to sew along the shorter edge. I'm going to put some pins in here just to keep those side seams together. So I'm just going to put a couple of pins in this fabric just to keep those edges lined up. If you're newer to working with knit fabric, it can be a little bit tricky, but you can spray a starch stiffener on it, which will help a lot. So I have this ready to sew, and I'm also going to turn these two pieces right sides together and lay them on top of each other, and then I'm going to pin all the way around the outside of the hat, making sure not to pin along the bottom because we won't be sewing that just yet. And you can use as little or as many pins as you'd like. It's really up to you. If you're just starting out, you'll probably feel more comfortable with a lot of pins because that'll keep your fabric from shifting too much. One of the things I want to talk about that's really important when you're sewing these hats is using the right type of thread. So this is called EloFlex thread. It is by Coates & Clark, and you can find it at Joann. And one of the things I like about it is it's actually stretchy thread. It's specifically designed to be used with knit fabric because when you're wearing knit fabric, you usually have negative ease. And what negative ease is, it means that the measurement of the knit fabric is smaller than the body part that it's going around. So for instance, on a hat, it's going to be stretched and it's going to be tight, and your seams need a little bit of movability, and this stretchy thread allows them to move without your stitches popping. So I am going to thread just the top of my sewing machine with the EloFlex. You can use regular thread on the bobbin. So I'm going to place this underneath my presser foot, and I'm using a 3/8 inch seam allowance. And because I'm using the EloFlex thread, I'm just going to use a normal stitch, just a straight stitch. But do make sure to back stitch at the beginning and end of your seams. I'm going to cut my threads. Now I'm going to press this seam allowance nice and flat so that it lays flat against the baby's head and there's not a lot of bulk in there. So I'm going to grab my iron. I'm just using my Cricut EasyPress. This is the mini version and I love it for sewing. It's so nice and handy to have right next to my sewing machine. So I am going to lay this flat and press the seam allowance open. Just going to make sure this is on. Give it a second to heat up. Now it has a nice little precision tip, which really allows me to get inside of the seam allowance and get everything nice and flat. So now I'm going to fold this over on itself so that the wrong sides are facing each other, and I'm going to keep my seam allowances lined up. So now my band is ready, and I'm just going to set this to the side while I start working on the baby hat. So I am going to start at one side of this baby hat and sew it together. The trickiest part of this is sewing around this little indent, and I'll show you how to do that. Make sure that you back stitch at the beginning and the end of this. That's the most important part. And remove your pins as you go. You're just going to follow along the edge of this fabric as you go. You will have to turn ever so slightly, but just go slow and follow the fabric. Once you get to the tip, you're going to want to put your needle in the down position, and then you can raise your presser foot and turn your fabric just a little bit. This will help you go around the edges, the rounded edges, and keep doing this. Go a few stitches, lift up your presser foot, then keep stitching. Lift it up again until you come back to a straight part. And you'll do the same thing on this indented part. So I'm going to make sure my needle is in the down position, and then I'm just going to pivot a little bit. And you can even pull on your fabric a little bit to go around these corners, or you can use the same method that we talked about earlier. I find when you're first starting, it's a little bit easier just to raise your presser foot and move the fabric. as you come to the end, don't forget to backstitch. So now my little hat is all sewn, and I'm going to take my scissors and just trim some of this excess so that it won't be bulky when we turn it right side out. So I'm actually just going to use my rotary, and I'm going to trim close to but not into the seam allowance and get rid of a little bit of this extra fabric. And I always try to cut away from myself when I'm using a rotary. That way there's no accidents. And now it's time to turn this right side out. So you're going to take your finger and just push these little points so that they're right side out. And here's your little baby hat. Now the points might look a little bit funny, so what you want to do is either take a turning tool or use your fingers to just roll those seam allowances all the way out. You want them to look nice and sharp. And right now I'm going to take my iron and I'm going to press this whole hat. And the reason that I press it is it gives it a cleaner looking finish, and it helps those seam allowances to roll all the way out. And I love having this little pressing pad right next to my sewing machine because I don't have to get up in the middle of sewing to go pull out my ironing board and my iron. I just have this right here with my sewing station, and it's so convenient. Okay, so that is looking great. Now I'm going to take my little bunny ears and tie them in a knot. This is my favorite part because it turns out so cute. And then I just do a double knot. So here we have our hat, and now we're going to add the band. And what I want to do before I add this to the hat is section my band into 4 different pieces. So I'm going to use some pins, and with my right hand I'm going to hold the seam allowance over here so I know that this is now sectioned in half, and I'm just going to put a pin through here. And what this does is it makes sure that everything is divided evenly, because your band is actually a little bit smaller than the hat, so it is going to be stretched, and you want to make sure you don't get any puckers. Now I'm going to split it in half again, lining up my pin with my seam allowance, and I'm just going to throw 2 more pins in there. And after you've done this a few times, you can just eyeball it. You don't have to section it off, but I find that it's helpful if you want to make sure that it doesn't have any puckers. Okay, now I'm going to slide the hat inside, and I always like to take my seam allowance and just line it up with my other seam allowance, and I stick a pin right directly through that seam allowance. Okay, and I'm gonna take a pin and put it straight through. Then I'm gonna come to the other side and do the same. And you can use the pins that you've already put into your band just to line everything up. And then I'm gonna put those pins together and find the center point on my baby hat. Looks like it's right here. And I'm gonna line that up with my band. And the same thing on the other side. So now we have everything lined up and we're ready to start sewing. So for this, I'm just going to slide this. I've removed the extra table from my sewing machine, and I'm going to slide this right in. And you just want to make sure that all 3 of your fabrics, the edges of the fabric, are lining up. That's really important. And I'm just going to start sewing. I'm going to use a back stitch, lock those stitches in, and then I'll remove my pins as I'm sewing. And I like to overlap my stitches just a little bit and back stitch. Now I'm going to cut my threads. And the nice thing about this with the EloFlex is that it stretches, and your seams, you don't have to worry about them popping. And now it's time to press again. I'm going to grab my pressing mat, flip this downwards, make sure that all 3, so you should have 3 different pieces of fabric, and I want them to be facing upwards. I'm just going to use my EasyPress to get right inside and push all of those seam allowances upwards. And I love how little this iron is because I can use it on these itty bitty baby projects, and it just fits right in there. Okay, now I'm going to fold my band in half and turn it upwards just a little bit, and I'm going to give it 1 more press. And there you have it, a cute little baby hat.